The Dallas Stars have been a very active team in free agency. Dane Lewis of Locked On Stars joined us to talk about the signing of Matt Duchene and what lies ahead for Dallas. All that and more on today's Locked On NHL podcast.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome, everybody, to the Monday edition of the Locked On NHL podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank everyone who makes Locked On NHL your first listen every day. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you can get new episodes as soon as they drop. And you can also now find us on SiriusXM on the SXM app. Just do a search for Locked On NHL. It is my pleasure to welcome to the show a familiar face and voice to Locked On NHL listeners and viewers, Dane Lewis of Locked On Stars. And Dane, a very busy week here for the Dallas Stars, but the highlight has got to be the surprise addition of Matt Duchene. What are your thoughts on this acquisition?
Yeah, big surprise is definitely the way that I would describe that move. You watch all these other, transactions and acquisitions go down on Saturday, and the Stars had kind of, shown some flashes here and there, a trade with New Jersey, and then, they re-signed a defenseman in Joel Hanley, and then out of nowhere, you see that the Stars are signing a player who, was playing in the past 3 seasons with one of their biggest rivals in Matt Duchene, and I definitely was not expecting that move, but the more I've thought about it, and especially looking at the contract that he signed, I think it's a pretty good move for the Dallas Stars. Only a 1-year contract, $3 million for a guy who wasn't as great this past season, but 2 seasons ago, 43 goals, I think was, close to 90 points. So you get a guy like that who gets to come in, and the expectation is that he could find himself potentially on a third line for the Stars. That's how deep the forward depth is for the team, especially, when you just look at the offensive firepower. Robertson, Hintz, Pavelski, Wyatt Johnston, the 19-year-old, now 20-year-old rookie who scored 24 goals in his rookie season. Jamie Benn, you're hoping to see some of what he brought to the table last year as well. And Tyler Seguin as well, Mason Marchment, Evgeny Dodonov, who's been recently extended. So it's a little complicated and a little messy in some ways, but it's exciting to have Matt Duchene in the mix, knowing just what he can bring to the table at 5-on-5 and on the power play as well. The Stars had a great first power play unit. And then the second power play unit, I would say decent at best, just because all of the really good players were on that top unit. And then, if you're able to throw in a guy like Duchene on that second unit, I think that makes them a little bit more dangerous and adds a new layer to the Stars offense.
And because of all the talent surrounding him, he's not going to be called on to be the guy in Dallas. And yet, because it's a 1-year deal, he has a lot of incentive to have a great season.
Yes, that's very true. So, whether he is interested in potentially staying long-term in Dallas or, getting a paycheck somewhere else in the league, I think that he would be pretty motivated, especially with how things ended in Nashville. It wasn't just contract ended. He was bought out basically. And I obviously don't know what was said between him and Predators management, but that's kind of just hey, we don't want you. We're not interested in your services anymore. And that can't be easy for any NHL player. So I imagine the motivation is pretty high right now for Duchene to continue to prove that he's got plenty left in the tank, which I believe he does at only 32 years old. And it might be a weird transition having competed for so long against the Stars in the division in Nashville and even in Colorado earlier on in his career. But he's joining a veteran deep team. And I think that he's going to, once he kind of gets his, gets everything settled and gets his feet wet with the organization, that, pretty deep into the season, we'll be mentioning his name amongst all of the other veterans on the team that are setting the example both on and off the ice.
The draft was last week. Your thoughts on how the Stars did at the NHL draft?
Yeah, it was an interesting draft because the Stars were without their first round pick, and then they were going into it without a third round pick, but they made a trade to get one. And it's interesting when you look at all the players that they acquired, because the deeper you go into the draft, it feels like the less information you have on some players. But I feel like they had the luxury of taking the best player available at each position, just because they are pretty deep at the NHL level, and they have some pretty nice prospects already in the system as well. So the pressure wasn't necessarily on to go out and get these franchise-altering players because you already have a lot of those guys in the organization at the moment, and some of them, in their prime in the NHL right now. So, I mean, you pick one player in each round, 2 through 7, and if you can get one or two of those guys to be decent NHL players, or maybe even a little bit better than that, I think that you can count that as success. But they kind of went all over the place. They got a few forwards, they got some defensemen, they picked up a goaltender. So not the flashiest draft by any means, but I don't think that it was necessarily a bad one either. But only time will tell if it was worth giving up that first round pick last September in exchange for Nils Lundkvist, who the Stars are hoping can embrace a little bit bigger of a role this season.
Yeah, that obviously will be key. What does this team still need to do between now and the start of training camp in September?
I mean, what I would like to see them do, and it's going to be difficult with the current cap space, just below $600,000 left in current cap space. I'd like to see the defense get a little bit deeper. And as we're recording this on Sunday, I know earlier in the afternoon, the Stars did acquire Gavin Bayreuther from the Columbus Blue Jackets. He was a free agent. The Stars signed him to a pretty relatively cheap deal, $775,000 for one season. I know that he has kind of spent some time kind of going back and forth between the NHL and AHL, but it's a one-way contract. So I imagine that means the Stars are interested in him being in the NHL unless they think he can clear waivers. But I just feel like they need to do a little bit more, because that's really where they got burned in the postseason. And you look at that Vegas Golden Knights team that just won the Cup. That defensive structure was very good. And so you have to give props to the coaching staff there. But they also had the personnel that could execute that structure night in and night out and play disciplined defense, block shots, but then also use that defense to help generate momentum down the other side of the ice. And the Stars do have some guys that can do that. And Miro Heiskanen, I think Nils Lundkvist is going to, step up and be a little bit better this year. Thomas Harley, who's finally making the full transition from the AHL to the NHL, should be a nice addition as well. But there hasn't been too many other moves made to bolster that defense. And they traded away a veteran in Colin Miller yet on Saturday in exchange for a 5th-round pick in 2024. So you can't necessarily say that the defense has gotten worse, but it certainly, in my mind, hasn't gotten much better since the season ended and since free agency is open. So we'll see what else is in store. If anything is going to change, it's probably going to have to come via trade, which is going to be interesting because so many of the Stars players, especially the ones that provide pretty good value, have no trade clauses or no move clauses. So it's not just going to be as easy as trying to deal them. Though, of course, those players would have to, give permission to be dealt to wherever the Stars might be looking to send them.
Is there a particular type of defenseman or role on defense that they need to fill the most right now?
I think it comes, the size department is a little bit more of what they need. And they do have some defensemen that pack some good size, but you want to get those guys that, can play with a little bit of edge out there. And I know that they have a guy in the system right now, Lian Bichelle, who is the 1st-round pick for the Stars in 2022. I don't know if we'll see him in the NHL this year. It might be too early in his development, but a guy like that, I don't have his exact measurements, but I know he's a big guy, and he has described his game as, he likes to have the puck on his stick. He likes to help move and generate offense, but he also likes to be the guy that, finishes checks along the board or, hymns offensive players in their own zones and makes it difficult for them to get the transition game going. And I really do think that's what the Stars are lacking at this moment. That, you have your Esa Lindells of the world, your Yanni Hakanpääs, but, both of those guys above or around the age of 30, not as fast as they used to be. And so you'd like to have a little bit of youthfulness out there as well as maybe a little bit more size, because it feels like at times the team can get pushed around a little bit. And I think that, if they can get a little bit more of those enforcer type players out there, that makes it a little more difficult for the other team's offense to get going. And of course, gives a boost to the Stars defense, which in turn helps Jake Ottinger and makes his job a lot easier every night.
No doubt about that. Dane, why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find the podcast and where they could find you on social media?
Yeah, Locked On Stars can be found anywhere that you get your podcast, on YouTube or your favorite podcasting platform of choice. Anywhere you can find Locked On NHL, you can find Locked On Stars as well. And I'm on social media, just at Dane_Lewis and at Locked On Stars on Instagram and Twitter while we can still use it. I know that there's been some changes on Twitter as of late that maybe make it a little more difficult to use now, but we're still there right now.
All right, Dane, thank you so much. Always great to talk to you.
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Gil.
Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Take your first swing at betting on MLB on FanDuel and get 10 times your first bet amount in bonus bets up to $200. That's right. Just bet $20 and you'll land $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. That's $200 you could spend on betting on everything from the money line to the over-under to who you think is going to hit the first home run. Met fan, Yankee fan, or a fan of any other team, you got to check out the odds at FanDuel on the app. It's all on an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Plus, when you win, you can get paid instantly. There's no better place to bet on MLB than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So sign up today and visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get up to $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, official partner of Major League Baseball.